Welcome, officially welcome to the National Indo-American Museum's virtual panel discussion. This is, I think, our last of the series. We have had 3 panel discussions, one each month in Jan, Feb, March, and this is the April's panel discussion, and I believe it's the last one. So you made it just in time. Thank you so much for being here, for joining in our today's event. Very, very exciting conversations ahead of you. It's called Embodied Dualities. Then the title itself kind of gets the wheels turning. So I'm really excited, just as you are. Some basic house rules before we start. You are on mute. Yes, that's not a mistake. However, you do have a voice. In the chat, you can leave your questions, your comments, chat with each other. I'll be good with that. Please use the chat button freely. For now, to get things started, please use the chat box and let me know, let everyone know, where are you joining us from today? Let's see the diversity that we have been able to gather together. So I would type, my name is Jitesh Jaggi and joining in from Chicago, Illinois. Please let us know where you're joining us from. Other house rules, the event is being recorded. You are free to keep the video panel on or off. What else? Yeah, that's about it. Let's get it started. So my name is Jitesh Jaggi, your host, and you're probably familiar with me if you have attended our previous panel discussions. I'm the program coordinator for the National Indo-American Museum, NIAM. If you're not familiar with the museum, we are a cultural heritage institution that bridges the gap that collects cultures with all Indian Americans. When I say Indian Americans, I mean Indian Americans of all backgrounds, being a rich country that we are in India. Today, we are discussing, this panel discussion is going to feature 3 of the eMERGE artists. So our current exhibition is called eMERGE Art of the Indian Diaspora, curated by Shaurya Kumar from the School of Art Institute of Chicago. We are very grateful to him for that, and you would love it if you can make it to Lombard, Illinois, where NIAM is located currently. I will leave the address in the chat box as well. But for now, for the panel discussion, we have 3 artists from the eMERGE roster, and we also have a guest moderator today, who you will see in a minute. And I'm just letting a few people in again. We have a sizable room. Thank you everyone for joining in. I am letting others in. Welcome everyone who just joined in. My name is Jitesh Jaggi. If you wanted to attend NIAM's panel discussion, you are at the right place. All right. Okay, so I am going to welcome, and please join me in welcoming our moderator for the day. Give me a second. Hello, Ambika. Thank you for joining us today. Let me see if I can unmute you.
Hi.
Hey, thank you for joining today.
Thanks for having me, Jitesh.
Absolutely. So what we did this time, and Ambika actually suggested this, instead of us reading bios of each other, how about we just get into discussions and conversations, and I will leave everyone's bio in the chat box for you to read. And it will also be later on in the email. So Ambika, thanks for joining in. Like I said, before we start off, I wanted to kind of throw a question at you, if that's okay. All the 3 artists today, we have Sarika, we have Rit, Shrestha, we have Kaveri. Their work is right there at the National Indo-American Museum's exhibition right now at eMERGE. And for those who have visited the museum, you will see how distinct their styles are, including the approach, the materials used. They are all, at least from an outsider's perspective, look very, very different, very distinct. I was wondering if you were also able to see any mutual grounds in all 3 of their work. or just an approach, or anything that struck you as a common underlying factor in all the three works? Oops, I'll unmute you again.
Thanks. I'm excited in part to be speaking with the three of them today because their works are so quite vastly different. But I think in the conversations that I had with each of them, I feel like there is some nice connective tissue there, which we'll be, I think, getting into. And partly why we ended up calling this Embodied Dualities is sort of thinking about the ways in which they are, to some extent, all, I think in some ways considering both the absence and presence of the body in their works, and these, in some ways, these kind of dualities of absence and presence, of decay and growth, yeah, I think we'll sort of get into that a bit more. Body psyche, location, dislocation, but all in through various very like different entry points, through architecture, through abstraction, through language and poetry. And I think you'll see ways in which their processes and their practices kind of embody that, all of that. So yeah.
Wonderful. So who do you want to invite first in this panel? Which artist do you want?
I keep muting myself. So we'll be starting with Sarika Goulatia, and I'll just let her kick it off. As you said, you'll be posting bios into the chat, so we won't get too into the weeds. But thank you, Sarika.
Sarika is here. Sarika, welcome, and thank you for joining today.
Absolutely. Jitesh, I just wanted to remind you if the live transcript's on. Perfect.
Sarika kind of reminded us to kind of make it even more accessible and describe ourselves. For those of us who are joining in today, it might be helpful. So I will start. Again, like I said, my name is Jitesh Jaggi. I am wearing a yellow shirt. I have dark black hair, brown skin, and that's pretty much it.
A beard and a mustache.
Yes, way longer than I expect, but yes, a beard and a mustache. Go ahead, Sarika.
Okay, hi, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. I'm Sarika Goulatia. I am wearing a red perma pleated sort of shirt, and I have glasses that are blue and red in color, and I have straight dark brown hair. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen. Hopefully it's going to go as I want it to go. All right. Karmanasya vadikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana. You have the right to the work. You have the right to work only, but never to its roots. Conflict, contradict, confront. Seductive and inviting, elemental, changing, reflecting, symbolizing, distorting and crumbling, mingling, mixing, questioning and articulating, the random and the diverse, the rigid and the structured, harmonious and discordant, coexisting, homogeneous society, a myth. Consumed, a wilting body, a broken table. Standing strong, the indomitable human spirit, marks, indentations, a coded language. Broken memories, severed mother tongues. Slaughter of cells, the passage of time. Nostalgic, the forgotten past. Lost loves, pulling and nudging. Come back, come back. Inscriptions, coded, decoded, the past, the present, and the future. Excavating, commemorating, recording the traces of time, impressions, grime, slag, dirt. A memorial. Examine history, identities. Inviting, intrusive, elusive, balancing the interplay between ephemeral and permanent, maximum and minimum, delicate and robust. It's not moving to the next slide. Sorry about that.
Good.
Delicate and robust, alluring and aggressive, setting the stage, life-threatening, transformative, all-encompassing, identifiable, unobtrusive, precarious. Heightened perspectives, the mind, consumed, fragile, manic depressive, anxiety, hypomania, irritability, aggression, broken windows, assemblages, distortions, overwhelming, consuming, controlled chaos, roid rage, the effects of steroids, dissolving self, birth and death, coexisting, every breath taken, a breath reduced, death, a constant trigger. We live, we wait, and we die a little every day. In the fear of death, do we really live? Sometimes forgotten, sometimes remembered, the trial and tribulations never erased. For some reason, my enter is not working, so I'm sorry about that. I have no idea what's going on. But balancing form, aesthetics, the faded, the broken, the fragmented, caged perspectives, despair, a lost childhood, confront mortality, disarray, consumerism, opening doors, introspection and dialogue are embedded histories, activating the senses, emotions, ideas, needs, and wants. The myth of permanence lingering, questions yet to be answered. Is it too late to undo the cuts on the flesh? Are tissue wrapped perspectives to be ripped, the sudden breath of vision? Patrilineal inheritance, voicing the voiceless, as society advanced, blurred borders, navigating through bridges, the world in harmony, walking in and out of continents, the perfunctory minority, a pleasant diversity. Silence and stillness, political confusion, congruent, conflicting elements unfold a dialogue. Divided selves reflect. Address provocation, glitched images, distancing, blurring the lines between fiction and reality, abstract and tangible. Irrational and rational. Investigate the rise of white nationalism, the meaning of patriotism, a study of cause and effect. The tarp-wrapped Confederate monuments, tiki torches, the banal object, the tangible civil and political unrest, suppressing communities, institutionalized racism, the politics of textiles, hate symbols, symbols of white supremacy, patterns embedded, the politics of fashion. Crown on top of the W, Ku Klux Klan, advanced white society, Iron Cross, hammer skins, Nazi eagle, SS bolts, swastika, news, boots and laces, not equal to, triangular clan, Triskel, echo, blood dropped cross. I am speaking, we are speaking. Do you hear me? Do you hear us? Or drown our voices? Judge, ignore, talk over, question, suffocate us. We are rising, breaking and shattering glass ceilings. Do you hear us? We are speaking. We are the Not White Collective, excavating histories, exposing realities, exorcising oppression. We reclaim the power to name ourselves. Thank you. I'm sorry about all the glitches I had. I don't know why my slide presentation wasn't going as smoothly.
Good. Thank you. Thank you, Sarika. Yeah, you can share, stop share, and I will unmute Ambika again.
Thank you so much, Sarika. I'll let Rit Premnath just take it away. Thank you.
All right, so next up is Rit.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Jitesh and Shaurya and Amita and everyone else at NIAM for the invitation and for organizing all this. I'm really happy to be in the company of Ambika and Sarika and Kaveri today. My name is Shrestha Rit Premnath. I go by Rit. And I thought I would kind of organize this little presentation around the topic that Ambika prompted, embodied dualities. It's kind of amazing to follow Sarika's kind of this poem performance. But I've been thinking a lot about aporias, which are these sort of irresolvable internal contradictions or disjunctions that are really kind of the framing principles of a lot of the work that I do. One of these framing principles or aporias is the idea of recto verso, the front and the back of something. And I've been thinking a lot about this, the way in which bodies are present in space, the kind of both active and passive claims that we make in space, whether it's a homeless person who just has to be somewhere, who's displaced by, say, a real estate project, or whether it's protesters who are confronting regimes of power. And in each of these cases, I'm interested in thinking about what's revealed and what's hidden, the recto and verso of something. I've been using these bodies, these kind of cutouts made out of foam and plaster to think about this. I call them slumps for maybe reasons that are quite obvious by looking at them. They slump on things, they require a support to hold them up. And in some ways, they make me think about the relationship, this kind of codependent relationship between body and architecture. The other recto verso that I think about, I edit a publication called Shifter. I write, I'm interested in the left and the right page of a book and the way in which, once again, these two sides kind of present two realities that are somewhat separate, but at the same time force us to think about them in relation to each other. In this project, I was reperforming in a way Andrzej Kedere's gestures of Polish artist gestures, but thinking of myself as a flower seller. These flower sellers in Italy are predominantly South Asian, often Bangladeshi. And I was interested in thinking about how I, as an artist, and I'm often putting myself in situations of visibility. People look at what I do, whereas there are other kinds of immigrants who disappear, who make themselves visible publicly, but people avert their eyes from them. And these street vendors being one of those people. And I was trying to think about the artist as the immigrant and the immigrant as the artist, and what kinds of relations and contradictions it opens up. The other kind of duality that returns often in my work is presence and absence. In this project, again, that I did in Rome, I encountered graffiti in the streets where police had just entered into a community and people had spray painted on the walls. Immigrants are not the problem, the police is the problem. I returned the next day to take photographs, but the police had whited it out. So these are photographs of the whited out protest signs, and the piece is titled Monochrome. So I'm interested in how presence makes something absent and absence makes something present. I'm also interested in kind of notions of being with, of pairs of bodies, how bodies are always together. In this video project titled Una Doble Vida, I interviewed a day laborer who waits for work at a street corner near me in Brooklyn, and asked him to speak about the horizon line as both a space that one leaves behind, but also maybe a space that one longs for. And the two videos, one is a sunset, and the other is a crate that a lot of the day laborers sit on when they wait for work. And this prompted him to speak about his life, this double life where he lives in the US, but he lives here in order to send money back home to El Salvador. And so to me, and he called it Una Doble Vida, and I was interested in, again, this way that people are always, even when they seem to be standing alone waiting for work, they're always waiting with and for someone. I'm actually not going to play the video for the sake of time. Another duality, separate and support, how the same structures that separate us also contradictorily support us. And in this project, Those Who Wait, these pairs of figures that accompany each other, that support each other, are also separated by these fences that hold them up. I mean, sculpturally, that literally kind of support them in the space. And another kind of separation is these emergency blankets that I've stretched to turn into kind of mirrors. And they also separate viewers from each other as they circle through the space, but also superimpose people on each other because it's a very thin material and acts as a kind of double mirror. I've also been making these exit signs that are, I think of as 2-word poems that are installed sort of high up on the walls that go along with these slumps. This exit sign says exile on one side and exhaust on the other. They're separate and support as well in this show. Another kind of contradiction that has been of interest to me is that between power and dissent. And a series of pieces titled Kettling came out of this thinking, how and thinking about the 2020 protest, the Black Lives Matter movement, and the way police quite literally kind of corral and capture protesters. But in this moment of confrontation, power becomes revealed, which is usually invisible, but always present. So I'm, again, thinking about how in this moment of kettling, power through some sort of force becomes visible to us. This is the piece at NIAM, Lean Hold, another duality. More recently, I've been thinking about waiting with, not only as a relation between people, but also as a relation between people and other forms of life. And in these two exhibitions titled Grave Grove, I grew weeds that were collected locally in Cincinnati for one exhibition and Cambridge for the other, to grow between these metal structures that resemble unfolded cardboard boxes. It's a form that interests me, of course, because at least in New York, I see a lot of homeless people sleeping on unfolded cardboard boxes. It's a form of peacefully occupying or making a claim to space. And I'm interested in making it reflective again, because it forces the viewer to look at what the person lying on the ground sees, which is the view above. Here are some of those exit signs that I mentioned. And the exhibition at the list. And I'll leave it there. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rit. And finally, Kaveri, and then after Kaveri goes, we'll get into discussion, but looking forward to hearing from you, Kaveri.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kaveri Raina. Thank you for having me. I'm going to be sharing a few images from the NIAM show, some of the paintings that I have up currently. Those paintings were done in 2018, early 2018, and while I was still in Chicago. So now I live in Brooklyn, New York. But this is a painting that's that kind of started this particular series, which I titled To Hover. And during that time, I was at a residency and I had 6 weeks to myself. It was a residency in Fisher's Island, New York. And I came up with a series of questions that I was giving myself. And some of the questions were, what does it mean to hover? What does it mean to be suspended? What does it mean to be in lull? What does it mean to hold someone? And what does it mean to be held? So these were some questions that I was kind of thinking about during that residency and also before, but writing in 2018 became really important to me, I guess. And so this was like the first painting I had come up with. So this is a painting on burlap. So burlap is a material I've been working on since grad school. That was like 2015. And so I paint from the back and the front of this material. This material is already quite permeable. So, but I'm pushing the paint from the back and I turn it around and then I respond to the marks from the front as well. So as you can see here, I was like, thinking about those questions, and here in particular, there's this silhouette form that I call like the shadow, and then this other entity on top of it, something constantly like hovering over top of you, whether it's an entity, whether it's like some sort of form that constantly feels like it's there. You kind of always see it, but can't necessarily pinpoint as to what it is. So I was thinking about that around that time. So there's acrylic paint on here. There's a lot of graphite also. But then again, it's like the back and forth. Here's another painting, which is the same size as the previous one. It is 35 by 24. So they're pretty smaller scale. And the use of graphite became really important to me in 2018. And the idea of, making a painting with acrylic and then putting graphite on top of it, hiding a lot of things, and but then also revealing a lot of things. Again, the idea of absence and presence, things that are seen, but things that are hidden also, I guess. And here's another one where it's quite large. I started also thinking about, of course, bodies and how I consider these paintings an extension of myself, extension of my own body. And this one is 40 inches by 70 inches wide. So body as a landscape, body as a window into something else. So this imagery right here, this animal form is something that I've repeated, as you can kind of see in this painting too. It's kind of fragmented, and then it again comes up in this painting also. So it's always like this animal form and then kind of relationship between animal and human. So this animal form, and then for me, this other participant, which I call this like potentially a human form. They're very fluid. whether in gender, whether in personality. But for me, they're very particular, but I like the idea that for the audience, they can be multiple things. So again, this is painted from the back and front as well. This area right here is painted from the back. And I kind of consider these like sandwiches or like slabs of memories or slabs of histories where I'm, again, the paint is protrude from the back and then also from the front. And the surprise element in this process is quite high when I'm painting. I'm not sure how much paint is going to come through. It also depends on the quality of the burlap. So there's all these like spontaneous and things that I kind of, a lot of like perchance things that I just tackle on in the moment in the process. I show a couple of drawings that kind of lead up to these paintings. Again, at that residency, the 6-week residency, I did over 30 to 40 drawings while I was thinking about these particular questions. And these are all graphite drawings, but then again, similar, the shapes kind of creep up again, the similar bodily images and this idea of this graphite right here kind of constantly in motion. I was kind of thinking about this idea of like constantly circling around a decision, but not necessarily landing on something. I feel like I personally feel that in my own life, but also this idea of constantly in this motion of lull of some sort. And that's where kind of like these halos or this like hovering, lingering motion of graphite kind of started coming into the paintings. Here's another one where this is quite big. It's 75 inches tall by 40 inches. So I consider them, you know, as I said, extension of myself physically, but also when I'm moving them, they feel very, I have this one-on-one relationship to them, which I really enjoy. And again, painted from the back and front. And this one's titled, Wish It Was Otherwise, Lack Of. And so I give myself sentences that I've come up with, whether, you know, from my sketchbook or things that I've read, and kind of respond to those sentences. So for this one, it was wish it was otherwise, lack of, and thinking of like stories from the past or memories and kind of coming up with an imagery via this language or these words. So they kind of dictate. I would consider these like inner dialogues sometimes also, because in my studio, it's like me, my paintings, and luckily this like window I have. So it's a very like solo atmosphere and constantly introspective. So yeah, so it's like conversation between the two of us, I guess, but this other entity, which I also consider, you know, these paintings. Here's like an installation view just to kind of give you an idea of the space. Yeah, so this painting in conjunction with this painting over here, again, they're very like portal-like and physical. This was a show at Patron in Chicago. And right before COVID, February of 2020, the show went up. And again, the idea of the landscape and the idea of the body. So whether I'm going this way or whether I'm going this way, I like the idea of the viewer kind of feeling they're kind of part of it. Let's see. Oh wait, this one was called Somber Partings, Swaying to the Moon. So again, yeah, giving these sentences and kind of responding. If I have like some sort of like an inclination of some sort or a memory from the past, they usually kind of help dictate the painting. So the painting style kind of shifted a bit. These are a few paintings I'll show that were from February of last year, February 2021 to September. So they're like a series of 6 paintings, again on burlap. And this is like a chocolate brown burlap. And in this particular painting, the presence and absence is really vivid. And sometimes I also look at paintings from the past that I've done, and this is like a buddy of a previous painting. And again, like this is something that I know, and that's like a motivation for me to begin a painting, something that I liked in a previous painting that I'll like use for a painting in the current, I guess. So again, this area is painted from the back. And also these look very dark, much darker in person. And they're very physical. The texture of the burlap with the graphite is really present, which they just don't photograph well. Also, there's this like layer of sheen because of so much graphite on top of them that it's kind of hard to see actually what you're looking at in person. And to me, it was kind of repulsive in the beginning when I started painting this way. But since March of 2021, I've kind of started to, they've started to grow on me. They'll sit in my studio and I work on one painting at a time. Sometimes it take me a month, sometimes a month and a half. They feel like moment in time and kind of significant since this one-on-one relationship is really important. Again, the body is definitely that has come up over and over in these paintings. This is like one of the biggest ones I've worked on. And it's 90 or 84 inches tall by 75. And again, I'm also thinking about light in this one in particular, and how the graphite kind of, I'm setting myself almost for a disappointment in a way, because I am applying this graphite on top of the paint. And at times, as I mentioned, it's extremely hard to see or decipher what is actually happening. And this material burlap is, I'm applying layers and layers and layers of graphite. But since it's a porous material, majority of the graphite lands on my studio floor. So I'm applying and applying, but at the same time, it's not retaining the material as much. So again, this also element of like embracing the failure is something I've been thinking about as well recently. And here's the last one from that particular series, kind of inspired by the artist Leon Golub, who also went to SAIC very long ago. And again, the relationship between the human and the animal, and slight like subtle presence of like the other perhaps. So here I see 3 bodies kind of entangled. And again, these are painted. This is, again, there's a lot of like oil pastel and crayon and graphite and acrylic paint and lots of charcoal. So again, like sense of location, a sense of place is something that I've also been thinking about, where's the paint coming from, where is the absence and where is the presence of that particular material, and where do these characters like conjoin, where do these characters meet and mingle, and I think that the idea of also painting from the back kind of allows me to also have this like sense of depth physically that I feel like it's I enjoy it a lot. So yeah, so I think the process has kind of dictated a lot of these paintings, but yeah, I think I'm gonna stop there.
Thank you so much, Kaveri, and thanks to all the artists. I'm excited to get into the conversation. And I thought we could maybe just start with, again, going back to the prompt of and talking about how the body is present in your works, but also absent in an obvious or sort of representational way, and thinking about your interest in the relationship between body and space in particular, especially as it encounters systems or experiences, a kind of the relationship between body and the sort of psychological experience between space and spacelessness. And if you could each maybe talk about that and how that enters into your practice. I don't know who wants to go first. And maybe even Sarika, we can maybe start with you, because I also think your process is so physical. Just, I know you're working with the drill, and you spoke so poetically about your work, but I would also love to hear about like your process, the kind of the physicality of it, and how in some ways you're presencing the body in your work, in your especially installations and spaces like the work you have at NIAM.
Yeah, I think like for me, like once I have an idea, it like really begins at the conceptual stage. I'm very much think more conceptually than anything else. And post that, I think I'll take a lot of times marinating on how I want to present that idea. And once it goes into that production mode, it really becomes it sort of becomes a production. Like once I've come to what I want to do, it just becomes like a process of like physically, like you mentioned, the drill was like a physically labor intensive sort of process, because you're using, for the panel especially that I did, it was 281 panels, hand drilled. And when you're working with furniture, you can't even use like a drill press or other sort of tools. And I think through like the mark making is really happening through the process of eliminating or removing the wood, right? The drawing is coming up through that. Whereas with the pin drawings that are there at NIAM, it's very much by the act of piercing through, but the pins are very much still there. Some are perforated, some are left just exposed with the pins in there. And I think the body is very much present in the form that it's an installation. So I'm very aware that the viewer is very much the protagonist, and I'm like creating like this phantom sort of space. So it's like, it is an environment like based, like the one at NIAM is like a room that you would probably see, you know, it's like very much configured like that. And it's how the person will navigate through it and objects that are present in a room. So it's very staged in that aspect. I'm not sure if I answered your question.
No, that's perfect. That's great. Yeah.
I guess I could try to respond. I mean, maybe I'll respond to it in a slightly unusual way, which is that I think I've covered some of the conceptual aspects of how I think about bodies in space and viewers in space. But I was just thinking like Darby, who helped me make the sculpture at NIAM, is here listening in on this panel. And it just occurred to me that these sculptures, these slumps that I make, always require a second person to help, and they're very awkward objects to make. And so there's this one aspect of making where I'm trying to do it in my studio just to figure out what needs to happen on site. And it's almost like a rehearsal for a performance. And then the performance itself requires like a second person who's assisting. And I've worked with so many people over the years, and each develops into a certain kind of relationship as well. And so I think of that kind of, that the process in a way then becomes reflective, hopefully, in the artwork, but it also opens up these other dimensions of collaboration. Like with the weeds in my last two projects, they required collaboration with nurseries and with specific growers, and sometimes with specific people who are gonna keep the plants healthy and happy during the show. And so there are these other, like I'm thinking of Kaveri's idea of shadows or presences. There are these other presences and bodies that I think enliven or are part of the production of the work.
Yeah, and then also just going off of shadows, just in particular, in 2020, I was working towards a show when the pandemic started, and my solo walks from the studio to the apartment and back and forth. And at that time, it was like a 35-minute to a 40-minute walk one way. And thinking about just being solo during that 6-7 months initial time of the pandemic, and being alone, and then knowing that being at the studio also kind of being solo again. So this idea again of who is it, like, is it just me? But then I kind of started realizing that there's this other shadow that's constantly with me. Sometimes I see it, sometimes I don't see it. What is the shape of my body that I create when I'm walking? You know, whether while I'm like brisk walking or like slowly running or walk, you know. So I started thinking about shadows in that way, that we're never like I'm never by myself. There's always this other entity, whether it's like the positive side or the negative side. Freud goes into talking about like how the shadow is our negative part of ourselves, and our body, like our physical body, is the positive. And yeah, I think in those 6 or 7 months, it became really apparent to me that I'm never by myself. I constantly have this like buddy, whether it's an other entity alongside. So yeah, and then like me and my shadow became kind of like this whole, whether when I would be writing, or again, like this idea of these paintings are like giant and my studio isn't that big. So I am constantly moving them around, and the acrylic paint takes a long time to dry. So I have these like hair dryers and fans running to like make the process a bit faster, but it's constantly just me in my studio, solo, kind of moving these around back and forth and then responding. And also I like the idea that they are 40 inches this way, and it's kind of hard for when they do go up in a space outside of my studio, how people view it. It's kind of hard for two people to stand in front of it. So the one-on-one perspective is really important to me, and how narrow they are that way. But then again, the landscape ones kind of become more wider. So I'm constantly thinking about this way or that way, and how much I can put in and how much I can take out. But yeah, they are very physical and an extension of myself. Yeah, I guess so. The body is very important, whether it's me physically in them or like people that I've meet along the way or something. So there's always like a person in the painting via memories or via something from the past, I guess.
Yeah, I think I'd like to add like a little, I think because the pins have such a visceral reaction, a lot of people had almost like a reaction when I went for the opening. Some people told me that they had to run out of the space, and it's kind of interesting how people react to that, like the drilled holes, because they look worm-like. There is a sort of like that decay, which has
Sensory
a
feeling.
sensory feeling, right? Like, so there is that presence always there in the absence.
I'd love to also talk about, related to that sort of viscerality, even in your, I think you're all doing that even through language and through poetry, and how you're incorporating poetry in your work, and language. You know, Rit and Sarika, you've both worked with poetry as part of your process. Sarika, you even today prepared this incredible piece of writing as a way to encompass and speak about your practice. And you also have both incorporated poetry into the pieces that are on view at NIAM. I would love to hear from both of you how you get into that, and also Kaveri, and the way you're thinking about and sitting with language as you work on a piece, whether it's a conversation or a question you've asked yourself. Or it's so interesting to see similar words that you use in your titles in some of Rit's work. I'm thinking of especially the kind of visceral language of and what that evokes in the viewer and anyone who's reading your titles or reading the signs in Rit's work of that feel very bodily, of kind of linger and hold and hover and lean and all of these other sort of exit, exile, and would love for you to all get into that.
Yeah, I think for me, when I start with the title is somehow very important. And in my initial works, I used to not write poems as much. It would just be the title, but I spent a lot of time figuring out the title, for example, amorphous, humanorphous, or contrasting metaphors. But it was always like these kind of poetic in a way. And I think over the last couple of years, I've just started, like, I feel like I express a lot through the poems, and the poems are happening while I'm maybe making the work and while I'm in the process of mark making. And I think they evolve later. Maybe they are like all scattered and then I put them all together towards the end. but I think language is very important to me. What it presents, my titles sometimes tend to be so long that they take up more space than any description would.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, words are really important, I guess, even more than descriptions or the words often become titles. Sometimes I have the same titles for like the 2 exhibitions that I did have the same title. And then there's some pieces in multiple projects that have the same title. So for me, I think of words as a kind of organizing principle, and setting up a sort of conceptual framework. I think like I found at some point that I was more drawn to poetic than, let's say, theoretical writing in relation to my own work, because often theoretical writing is moving towards making like a kind of argument, whereas I'm less interested in making arguments and more interested in kind of asking questions or presenting these aporias that then, along with myself, the viewers are sort of like engaging with. And so poetry feels like poetry, or this sort of like text, I would say, as opposed to essay, feels like a analogous practice to, say, sculpture or drawing. So yeah, so for me, like I see them all kind of next to each other, and often feeding each other. Like when I'm sometimes having a hard time getting started in the studio, like between projects, like a word, or like finding like a word, like really helps me. Then it kind of like organizes everything else. So yeah.
Very grounding.
I really relate to that as well. And both Sarika and Rit, and I do feel that words are extremely important, and they do guide a lot in my paintings, especially when I see like a giant painting staring at me, like a blank giant painting. Words kind of really help me. It's weird because, you know, language and then the visual, like I try to, sometimes it becomes too literal for me in my mind. You know, if the word teeter is something that I have been thinking about for a while, like, which is kind of similar to hover and teeter, these 2 words kind of keep coming up. And what does it mean to teeter in between? What does it mean to hover in between? Or left over or left them. So again, like talking about contradictions, but sometimes, or majority of the times, these words guide the paintings, or the title of that painting that I was talking about, Wish It Was Otherwise, Lack Of. This was like kind of this sentence I made up while I was talking, like in email conversation with a friend. And the gist of that conversation, I kind of wrote in this sentence, wish it was otherwise, comma, lack of. And then that sentence assisted me in coming up with the title for another show of mine, which was No Lacks, Me and My Shadow. So I like to play with words and then see how one word for me can mean something very particular. But also when I start painting, it can feel very different. But yeah, same, like, what does it mean to be held versus holding someone? So yeah, I think starting in 2018, writing and words have become extremely important in actually making the physical paintings.
I love that it sort of operates as a way to locate and dislocate. It sort of like directs and then misdirects, and the way in which it operates in all of your works. I'm gonna, continue.
I was just gonna say that Ambika had mentioned this artist, Bhanu Kapil, who I have been thinking about more so recently too, and some of the questions that I read this thing that she wrote where she had these questions in the beginning of the essay that you had shared, Ambika. And I think some of them were like, how will you begin? How do you arrive at something? Where do you come from? Where are you in who do you love? And when I kind of was reading these, I felt like a affinity to these questions, or questions that may not have an answer necessarily, but just still feel like familiar. So that's an artist that I have been following since last year, I guess.
Yeah, I remember our conversations about shadow and self, and as the prompt for that Philly show. I'd love to, well, right before we open up to Q&A, I'd love to bring Sarika Kumar into the conversation. Sarika, if you would like, just want to acknowledge all of your work on the Emerge exhibition, and for bringing all of the artists together, and we'll love for you to ask a question or make a comment or statement before we open it up to the rest of the group.
Thank you, Ambika. No, it was such a pleasure to hear from you and all your questions and all the artists. As always, I feel that your title and the way you structured this panel, I think it reflects a lot of what we were trying to address through the exhibition. And I feel in a way, even the question that Jite started off as understanding, sort of individual styles and the ways in which people articulated their work, but still having this common tissue that was going, I think, not just in the 3, but all the 9 artists as well, and in a very interesting way. So I appreciated the way you had structured this talk and the way the artists spoke as well. It's always a pleasure to hear from all of you, of course.
Yeah, thanks for our conversations that guided this today. Any questions?
Right. So please type in your questions. I received one question in the private message. The question is from Rohini Iyengar. It says, this question is for Rit. Can you please elaborate on the concept of erasure in your work and how they lend to the construction, deconstruction of meanings?
Wow.
Beauty question, Rohini. Thank you.
Thank you, Rohini. Talk about the concept of erasure and how it...
Can you please elaborate on the concept of erasure in your work and how they lend to the construction, deconstruction of meanings? And Rohini, feel free to elaborate on the question if you feel like it.
I mean, one way that I guess I think about erasure is like maybe in relation to place. For example, when I think about real estate and the way in which certain histories are erased through gentrification, for example, through the displacement of people. So that even when I think of Brooklyn, for example, like in a very short period of time, like in 5 years, like it might seem to those who are new to the place, because there's always new people, that there is no history. And so there's a kind of absence. And I'm interested in thinking about ways that I guess art can both not so much necessarily reinscribe the past, because the past is the past, but to make the past present through some form of negation. Like Derrida has this concept of under erasure, like where you write a sentence and strike it through. So you present something and present its absence. And I'm really interested in that as a way of thinking about how there's a kind of palimpsest of absences in the present.
Thank you. Questions from the audience? Any more questions do we have? Please feel free to type them or raise your hand and I will unmute you. I have a question in the meantime, if you don't mind. I'm not an artist, of course, but I do dabble in poetry once in a while. So the question is for the group, since all of you are, it seems like, have a bend towards the poetic. I was wondering if there is an order here that follows, like do the words appear first and then you follow that with the art, with the representation? Or is it the other way around? Is it simultaneous? And this is for the group.
I guess sometimes the text comes also afterwards, but usually it's always in the beginning. I give myself a prompt or a word, Sometimes it evolves as I'm making the paintings, since they do take me a while. I'm sitting with them, and depending on the light, depending on the daytime, I think things evolve. But yeah, usually it's the sentence or the word is in the beginning. Sometimes I come up with titles like after I'm done with the process, and a month later I'll come up with the title or the word.
Yeah, I think for me, when I'm driving to my studio and back, I often talk to myself. And I like increasingly started recording that because what I'm saying at that point doesn't quite, like when I go back to it, it doesn't, like, you lose it. It's kind of, again, the loss of language that happens. Like you think of something and then it just gets lost. So I started recording a lot of that. And then even like words or things that matter to me or sentences that stay with me, I keep writing them down. And I'm not quite sure when I'll use it, but then they just come back into the work at times. And very often, I think the work begins with like titles that are, or not even titles, I would say, with the concept in mind, and it's like very straightforward. And as the work grows and the work abstracts from its original sort of starting point, and distills, so does the words that go with it distill, and the poem comes along. So that's what I've noticed with my process.
For me, and I'm just going to fold Avantika's question into my answer, which is that I think like there's like multiple things. Like there are kind of ideas and words, things that I'm reading, things that I think are interesting, but I don't know like how they relate to my artwork, and then materials that I'm exploring, and these are all sort of happening at the same time. Sometimes it's like there are material explorations that they don't like turn into an artwork, unfortunately. And sometimes there are words that just like kind of are in my head for a very long time and they don't connect to an artwork. So I think of them happening together. But in terms of NIAM, I thought it was, which happens always for me, is like I really like to have, and I imagine it's probably similar for Sarika, but I like to have a space in mind when I'm thinking of an artwork. And when Shaurya sent this plan, and then he was like, well, I was thinking of this long space for your piece, and I made like a 3D model, and it was such an odd kind of dimension, like sort of like a very long and low room, but it presented a really interesting kind of challenge. And I think then it shaped the piece, and then it connected to these two words, lean, hold, that had been on my mind. And they kind of like those three aspects that I like click together, which, hopefully happens. I always hope that it all comes together by the time the show opens.
Thank you.
Sort of related to that, I imagine you're also considering how an audience is going to navigate through your spaces, both Sarika and Rit, and curious if that enters
It was
into
kind
it.
of interesting because when Shaurya had shown the floor plans, like any site, whenever I've done site specific work or whatever, once you reach the site, it changes because you have to address the place in mind. Your visual of it or your sort of image of it is very different from when you actually reach the space, because I didn't anticipate the ceilings being that low. I didn't anticipate the floor being that gray. So all of that sort of starts playing into the way. And it was interesting because when I was installing, only Rit's work was in there. And I think Avantika had just left, but her work was outside of that space. So Rit and I are like almost opposite each other. So it was kind of interesting to have that play into while I was working. I think I was very aware of that. It isn't really a domestic space, but like it looks like a domestic space. It's unlike a regular museum or a gallery space that you would encounter with like tall ceilings and white walls. So it was quite interesting working in the space and trying to kind of create this installation where you knew people had to navigate through it, but at the same time, because I had these things pointing outwards, you don't want them getting injured. Sort of being aware of that.
I think yours specifically, Sarika, because the gallery space that we have is more like a room, and your work, it just fits perfectly. It looks like entering a room that someone inhabited in. So I agree. Ambika, I don't know if you want to repeat Avantika's question, or have you answered that?
Feels like maybe that was answered. Do you both feel like you, and if there's anything you want to elaborate about you installing in the domestic architectural space? I feel like that was.
I
have
guess.
a question.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Kaveri.
Oh, I was just gonna, similarly, I hadn't seen the space in person, of course. It was via floor plans. And I didn't also anticipate the ceilings being lower and then the floor being carpeted. But yeah, I think the hover series, I have 3 paintings, and then there's a non-hover series painting, and I'd never seen them placed in the same space together. And that kind of gave me this chance to kind of see paintings, because they're very different in studio, right? And then when they go out in the world, they're smaller than what they become like small things for me, small objects, not as like how I see them in the studio. And then kind of like we each have like a space to ourselves. But yeah, I guess seeing the 2 different paintings, 2 series come together was something that was interesting, which I hadn't done before, because I see like paintings as like series. And this time was the first time I kind of intertwined 2 different series together.
Maybe we could go to Padma's question. Do you ever struggle with wanting to express yourself in your native language, assuming it is different from English, or is that not a source of duality or contradiction for any of you? I'm also curious, because I know if you've shown internationally how you may have, I think this has sort of come up in individual conversations, but if you have had to translate or have chosen to translate.
I think I don't know, I can speak for myself. I think I think in English, like the duality of the languages, or the triality, if I may. It just like, it's not like, oh, let's think in English and now let's think in Hindi. It's like so like blended into the thinking that and into the process, that I don't think I ever think in a particular language. I've been asked this question a couple of times by other friends and artist friends who are born and brought up here, that do you think in English or Hindi? And I'm like, I don't have an answer for that. It's like just a very intuitive process. But I think like the duality in terms of like being raised in India and moving here, I think there is a definite interplay in the way I look at things, and the way like I was looking at Rit's work and how he is very, I'm sure he visits the hardware store for a lot of things, and I find the hardware store like a perfect like art store because I'm fascinated by these things, which I think are maybe not of that much interest to other artists, but I'm like really drawn to those industrial elements. So I think more in terms of material, but I don't think in terms of language I've ever sort of questioned the native language that I speak.
Yeah, it's a tough question, because I grew up in Bangalore with and my mother tongue is Tamil, and so I grew up speaking and reading and writing Kannada, speaking Tamil, reading and writing Hindi. But really, I think I grew up in an Anglophone context. So in Bangalore, I was mostly speaking English, and I still respond to my parents in English when they speak to me, sometimes in Tamil. And so so in that sense, like the question has become more complicated to me over the years, the longer I've been in the US, because I feel somehow like I missed out on the possibility of being like a proper polyglot, and have turned into a very like English-minded person. And it's definitely something I'm interested in, I don't know, challenging in myself.
Yeah, I guess similarly, I grew up with Hindi and Kashmiri, both those languages, and kind of lost Kashmiri along the way, but Hindi is what I talk to my family with mostly. And sometimes I find words in Hindi to be more directed or more like an affinity with than even the words, if I even translate it in English. So there's moments when I find, like when I have a studio visit or like I'm talking to someone who doesn't speak that language, sometimes I find myself like it's hard to explain what I'm trying to get out there. But more so now, I guess since 2018, 2017, I haven't had that struggle as much, but I think earlier when I had moved from India, it was more so, it was harder then, but I think it's evolved.
Yeah. And I think there are some things that don't quite translate as well. There are like some
Exactly,
Indian, like
yeah.
Hindi sayings, or like the Sanskrit shlok, which Rohini did mention in the comments as well. Like those don't translate really, even though I've done the translation in English, it's not quite, it doesn't get the essence. So it's very
Right.
hard to kind of translate some of those words.
Right.
There was another question. How do you see your past interacting with your present work? So I have a background in textiles, and I have always wondered where that went or disappeared. I used to consider myself a weaver by profession. But I think I've noticed that there's like a repetition and like this persistence, which comes with that sort of, it's a very, you have to have this patience while you're weaving fabric. And I think that's what I've seen translated into like most of my works that happen. There's like this constant, whether it's drilling, and I don't know if the use of power tools has something to do with the feminist in me trying to say, okay, you couldn't put a nail on the wall in India, but let's go and use all the power tools you can find. So there's like a duality in that aspect also of growing up in a place where for everything you have other people who can do it for you, whereas here you have to control those things yourself, and you're licensed to do it.
Right. Are there any more questions from the audience or comments?
There was a question that maybe we missed. I think it was Rohini's question about interior architecture relating to questions of not only the body and presence, but also questions of identity and disjuncture, which might relate. It's directed to you, Sarika. It might also relate to you, Rit, but we'll love to hear from all of you.
Yeah, I think when you make a private space public, sort of, it's a very interesting, like, and Darby is here. It was interesting. It was like almost setting up a room. So I was like going back and forth with her. Does this work here? Should we move the bed here? Like there were like these little, and I don't know if it happens with you, Rit, but I always go back and I'm like, oh, this could have been different, which is kind of responding similarly to a domestic space where you keep changing your environment over a period of time because you want to tweak it. And I feel that often happens with my installations, maybe because I'm overcritical. And I like go back and I wonder, like, maybe that wasn't a good decision. That should have been removed, or that should have been edited out, or something else should have been added in. And this particular installation, this is my third iteration of it. It's been shown in different spaces. And every time more elements start getting added into it. Just the space dictates it and other factors dictate it. So yeah, I don't know how you feel about that. We can't hear you, Rit.
Thank you. Thanks, Jitesh. Yeah, no, well, there's two parts of it. One is like, I do really enjoy showing in spaces that were not like built to be gallery spaces, because I think there's kind of intimacy in the space, like the ceilings are lower, you're always like very close up to the artwork. And because my objects are very figurative and they're very bodily, they're like kind of stand-ins for bodies. And so that relationship feels even more present. Like I had a really hard time, for example, doing this show at Contemporary Art Gallery, what is it, CAC Cincinnati, which is like a Zaha Hadid building, and it's like doing an installation in like an airport waiting lounge. You know, like there's no intimacy, it's just enormous. And so I always felt like I was working against the architecture to create like a sense of intimacy with the work. Whereas, you know, I mean, NIAM had its own sort of challenges, and because I set up first, I was sort of like in a kind of semi-construction zone without a sense of how the rest of the show was going to show up, was going to come together. So that was interesting to work against, but then it was so contained that I sort of enjoyed playing with. For example, like there's a wall that's like, the first thing you see is like a long space that's hidden by a wall in the middle of it. And to me, this is a very like interesting kind of formal problem to play with, that the piece is both like one piece and it's a diptych at the same time. And so like the eccentricities of the space, I think, like set up interesting challenges for me that I played with.
And Rit, like, because I've seen that like work in person, like it's weird because I've never wanted to enter the space. I almost treat it like a sacred space where I watch it from the outside, but I've not really navigated through the sculptures. I don't know if that's your intention or not.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the intention, that you would walk in and walk around. But again, to be honest, like I set up this piece first and I haven't been back. So it's, I'm planning to come to Chicago for the closing reception. And so I'm looking forward to seeing all the work, and also to seeing like what, you know, I mean, it's always strange, I think, as you were saying, with these sorts of things. Like I have a lot of intentions and I try to be as thoughtful as possible. And then sometimes after the fact, I look at it and I'm like, well, I don't know, that didn't really work out. It was really nice to read Pia Singh's review of the work, and then sense that she felt some of the things that I was hoping that people would feel in the work. And so then there's hope that something, you know, that she actually entered, that she tried to walk through, that this line stopped her. So there were, you know,
Kaveri, I wonder if, although you don't work in like architectural spaces, I do wonder if you have a response to this too.
Right. This show actually did kind of allow me, you know, their painting. So I kind of just had given them instructions as to like, you hang them and pretty much, you know, but when I did, so I went to the space, Sharia and Tamara had already kind of hung them up. And, but from this particular show, my future shows, I've kind of come up with this idea of actually hanging the paintings a bit lower than I have in the past, more so for the, you know, especially the ceilings were lower, right? And the paintings, there's this one painting that's 68 by 48, and it's quite a big painting for that particular space and wall, but hanging a bit lower kind of made it more so this like one-on-one interactiveness that I feel like I hadn't explored necessarily before. And the light was also a bit dimmer than what I have shown in the past. And since I'm working with burlap, there wasn't as much like interaction with light passing through the material. So that's something new that I kind of discovered about like the installation, and perhaps like playing with light in future spaces could be something, and then hanging a bit lower. Yeah.
I'll ask one last question, and thank you so much. It's been a really rich conversation. I just want to bring in Amita's conversation about how much fear, excitement, and trepidation do you feel when the final work is revealing itself to you? And I think this is really especially great because I feel like all of your, in the process of making, you all have these moments of sort of spontaneity and as part of your practice, and would love to hear that. And then once this question's done, I'll sort of hand things over to Sharia for maybe final remarks.
I guess I could start. I mean, I don't feel like there's a kind of that's sort of a reveal for me. Like I think there's like a lot of planning and lots of moments of reveal along the way. I always make like 3D models of my installations before they happen, and so but then at the same time there is this kind of like, you know, very messy sort of process of actually making it and hoping like that the whole thing like doesn't fall over, or, you know, there's a kind of precarity to it that is intentional and that's important, but is also like kind of nerve-wracking. And so there's that. And so I kind of feel like also I enjoy the excitement of the setup and all of that, but I don't feel like I'm in a moment anymore where like there's that kind of something completely unexpected happens. Like I hope something completely unexpected doesn't happen. I really try to plan ahead. Which is not a romantic answer, sorry.
I guess something that I struggle with is that I make the paintings in a very particular light, which is just a natural light in my studio. And I, you know, work in the morning, mid-afternoon, not much in the evenings. So when the paintings do go, so I'm seeing them in a very particular light, and depending on the color of the burlap too, and then the addition of the graphite on top of it. As I mentioned before, there's times when you can't even see if the light is, if it's like past, say like 5 p.m. or even 6 p.m. sometimes, and then taking the work to a gallery space where there is no natural light. So something that I've been struggling with is the work does look very different, honestly, when it's not in my studio. And I don't think it's fear, or it's more so just surprising. And depending on the color of the burlap, sometimes the paintings just look, the paintings I named, they're all on a cream burlap, but the most recent ones, they're like chocolate brown or like even black burlap. So so managing the light, sometimes the light passes through, sometimes it doesn't pass through. If it does pass through, there's another mark that it creates, which I didn't anticipate, I guess. So there's a lot of perchance things that I kind of leave up to the space, I guess, which I have to embrace.
Yeah, I think for me, like it was more formal decisions really on where should the window go, because there's no window in this room, and I wanted a window and this feeling of a domestic space. And it was very much formulated on those aspects where it needs to be an inviting room, a room that could really exist but cannot be used. So playing with that sort of duality there. And because a lot of these are pin drawings, I think the shadows do play a very important role. So for me, when I'm finished installing, I think we spent a good amount of time on what shadows I wanted to show, like especially like from the burnt lamp that hangs over the bed, because it just changes the way you're viewing the work. So I think that was important, and that actually, because there was no natural light, could be really controlled in some ways.
Right. There is one last question. I was wondering if everyone can give their quick comments on that. I'm going to welcome back Shaurya.
Thank you, Jitesh. And thank you again, Ambika, for coordinating this. I know that this is our last like a formally structured discussion with the artist, which sort of concludes our, you know, our series of conversations. I think one question that I had for each one of you as artists is that I would love to know, I think for the sake of everybody attending here as well, of what's coming next. Like, what are you planning? If you have any specific direction of the work, or if you're planning for an exhibition. We spoke a lot about your work like what led to the NIAM exhibition. Of course, we saw some works from other projects as well, but would love to know what's coming next, if that's possible to share briefly.
Sure. Yeah. Oh, I can start. Yeah, working towards a new series of paintings that kind of the theme of it is still relating to shadows, and I'm kind of doing a little bit more writing and researching a bit about 𝐤𝐚𝐵 Rani. And this is a very kind of a new take for me. It's usually the work is about myself and my people that I've known, but in this context, my relation to her in particular, and kind of getting to know more about her. So I'm working towards like these series of 12 paintings that'll be shown in mid-October in New York, and then the show in July in the summer in Chicago. But yeah, the show in Chicago will be a little bit a different series, which I don't have words for yet. But so yeah, these two, I guess, are pretty much the things I'm working on.
I have a couple of shows coming up with the Not Quite Collective, who I'm a part of. It's a group of 13 women from all parts of the world. And on my own, right now I'm working on, I'm doing therapy with rapid eye movement. It's called EMDR. And while I'm in these therapy sessions, I do these drawings. And I'm going to translate those into like larger drawings. Like, so I'm working on it conceptually right now. It hasn't, I haven't really, it's all being worked on a 4" by 4" sketchbook. And I'm not quite sure what's going to come out of that. But I'm like just changing my process, taking a break from the drilling.
I have I'm in a group show that opens next week at Experimenter Gallery in Calcutta, and which I'm excited about. It was the first time I've had a sculpture made, I guess, at a distance. So it was interesting to work with like a young artist in Calcutta and go through like all of these stages of production with him. So that's one thing that I have coming up next.
All right. Thank you so much, Shaurya, for your question and your signature blurred background. We appreciate you very, very much here at NIAM. Thank you to all the artists. Very, 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 like from the bottom of my heart. Thank you so much, Sarika, Kaveri, and Rit for joining us today. And a special thank you to Ambika, to you for facilitating this conversation.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I put my long thank yous in the chat because I probably couldn't get to them all and didn't want to go over time, but thank you so much. This was great. And congrats to all on working on this exhibition, and Shaurya, your curation, all of the artists, and especially with Sarika, Kaveri for speaking with me today. Looking forward to being in touch in future.
And we look forward to having you at the museum come soon. And, exhibition. That being said, we are looking forward. Here is me holding the screen again. We are also looking forward to having you, the audience, come to the museum, see the works for yourself, experience the works, I should say, by Sarika, by Kaveri, by Rit, and all the other artists. There are 9 artists in total. They will look completely different from each other, but there is still this underlying thread that connects them all. Most importantly, that these are arts by the foremost contemporary artists from the Indian American community. We really, really hope that you will join us. You will come soon. This exhibition is brought to you by NIAM, but also partly sponsored by the National Endowment for the Arts and our major donors. However, we really, really do appreciate your support. You didn't think I would forget asking for donations again. So there it is in the chat box. Please click on it. Please donate whatever amount you can afford. $10, $5, $25. We will take your $100, anything that you can. spend, and we will make sure to bring to you these cultural programs that we've been doing for free, straight to you live. Thank you so much again for joining us. Stay in touch. I will send you the bios for all the artists, including our moderator. And thank you. We changed the format from an hour long to an hour and a half, and you still stuck around. Let's see how long we can push you. Next time it's going to be probably a
Thanks for
5 hour
staying on.
program. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate you.
Bye.